Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zone. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome, and thank you for joining our third panel entitled The Roadmap to Opportunities for Growth Expansion into the Canadian Markets, Hong Kong, and Asia at the 8th Transpacific Entrepreneurial Virtual Conference panel co-organized by HKCBA and CanCham Hong Kong. So first, I'll start with a few general remarks. Any comments made during the webinar do not represent any official views. Please feel free to message the host directly for any questions or any issues you may have via the chat. This webinar will mainly be in English, but please feel free to ask your questions in English, French, or even Chinese to our panelists using the Q&A function or the chat at the bottom of your screen. I'll do my best to raise them with our panelists during the Q&A period. And if we don't answer them today, our panelists will endeavor to get back to you afterwards. So without further ado, my name is Cindy Ho, and I'm the National President of the Hong Kong Canada Business Association, HKCBA. Furthermore, I'm a partner at DS Lawyers, and I specialize in business law and more specifically in corporate and commercial law, M&A transactions, real estate, and regulatory law. And I assist companies in particular with focus in Asia, and I accompany clients, both Canadian and Asian, both in their transnational transactions. So enough about me. We will begin our webinar by opening remarks from the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in Toronto, followed by a panel discussion on how to expand relationships across Canada and Hong Kong, and how business ventures can grow and succeed in both the Canadian and Hong Kong markets. And finally, as I mentioned before, with a Q&A panel. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Emily Mo, Director of the Hong Kong Economic Trade Office in Toronto, representing the HKSAR government in Canada. And her office's mandate is to promote economic ties between Canada and Hong Kong. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Emily.
Thank you, Cindy. Hong Kong and Canada have rich and mutually rewarding relations in business, culture, and people ties. I'm happy to share that our relationship, especially the business ties, continue to remain strong during the pandemic, and more opportunities will open up in future. The China Institute at the University of Alberta released a research report titled Hong Kong-Canada Economic Ties in January this year. It pointed out that Canada's relationship with Hong Kong is distinct, and that economic and business opportunities between the two places remain abundant and profitable. The city has remained one of Canada's top 10 trading markets in the past decade. In terms of investment, Hong Kong was the world's third largest foreign direct investment destination in 2020, meaning that it served as a platform for fundraising even during the pandemic. In the same year, Canada's direct investment flows to Hong Kong more than tripled to 4.6 billion Canadian dollars. Making the city the second largest destination worldwide for Canadian direct investment abroad. With the relatively high number of Hong Kong descent living in Canada and vice versa, the report noted that the connections forged not only in economic exchanges, but in the flow of people and culture that are crucial to building and preserving vibrant Canada-Hong Kong relations. So the report concluded that Hong Kong is an important nexus in international trade due to its free port status, business advantages under the one country, two system framework, the special relationship with mainland China and access to Asia, and there have been increasing business opportunity for Canadians in Hong Kong during the pandemic, and more will follow as we move into the post-pandemic economy. This includes China's National 14th Five-Year Plan that supports Hong Kong's status as an international financial center and looks to expand our function as a global renminbi business hub, international asset and wealth management center, and risk management center. So the plan also promotes the continuing deepening of Hong Kong's economic integration with the mainland, particularly through the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area development. We have introduced numerous measures and new schemes to promote wealth management, asset management, and insurance sector between the mainland Chinese and Hong Kong markets in the past 2 years, benefiting relevant foreign companies in Hong Kong. The rapid growth of the tech sector in the region has also brought huge demand for capital. As an international financial center and the mainland's gateway to international funding, Hong Kong remains a listing venue of choice for companies around the world. Last year, Hong Kong raised over 42 billion US dollars in funds through IPOs. All in all, Canada should not miss the markets in mainland China and Asia, which are supported by a young population embracing digitalization, an emerging middle class looking for high quality products and services, as well as innovative ways to enhance the living standard. Canada's business, for example, those from the finance, INT, sustainability, health, as well as food and beverages, will definitely find space to expand to this market through Hong Kong. My office facilitates Canadian companies' expansion into Hong Kong to realize a rewarding future. So please do not hesitate to reach out at the networking section or drop me an email or LinkedIn message if you have any question. Finally, I would like to thank the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong Canada Business Association, as well as the panelists today for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. I look forward to the inspirational exchanges between our expert panelists. Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks a lot, Emily, for laying the groundwork for our panel discussion today. Now it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you our seasoned panelists. First up, Ray Walia. He is a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in both entertainment and technology sectors. Ray founded Launch Ventures, which owns and operates a network of proprietary accelerators, innovation labs, and investment funds. The most prominent incubator is Launch Academy, Western Canada's leading entrepreneurship facility, which has worked with over 6,000 entrepreneurs, 3,000 of which have grown their startups to seed and Series A stage and raised over $1.2 billion in funding. Launch Academy is designated provider for the Canadian Startup Visa Program, and one amongst many notable accolades is that Ray was named 500 most influential business leaders in British Columbia for 2021. Next up, we have Joseph Fung, managing partner of Saltagen Ventures. Based in Hong Kong, Joseph manages and operates a venture capital fund house focused on life sciences, material sciences, agricultural technology, clean technology, and education. He actively spearheads public-private institutional support from Canada and Hong Kong to help startups successfully develop opportunities on a global scale. One notable, again, amongst so many responsibilities that Joseph has, is that he was being appointed by the Canadian Prime Minister in the ABAC to represent Canada in the APEC with the support of the Minister of Trade and Global Affairs Canada. Last but not least, Drew is the managing director of IJW & Co., a boutique investment bank headquartered in Montreal, Canada, with offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, in the United States, and Antigua. He is the firm's valuation practice leader and director of Asian operations. Drew possesses over 38 years of professional experience, having valued several thousand companies for business valuation, mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, litigation, and support mandates on a global basis as well. He has frequently participated as a financial advisor on corporate transactions, startup businesses, as well as sourcing financing in North America and internationally. One of the many accolades of Drew is that he is a member of the board of the Montreal chapter of HKCBA, and his firm won the Business Leader Award at HKCBA, as well as the Success Story Award at HKTDC and the Federation back in 2016. I just have to say, wow, our seasoned panelists are really, really incredible. So let's dive right into the subject matter with our panelists. So my question for each of you is if you could introduce to the audience what each of you do in your respective companies that helps expand trade and commerce between Canada and Hong Kong, and can you give an example of how your company assisted in such cross-border transactions? I'll maybe start the question off to Joseph.
Cindy, thank you very much for the introduction. And I guess I'm representing here based in Hong Kong. So a little bit of a different perspective working with companies from Canada and elsewhere and utilizing Hong Kong as a base for launch. So, thank you for the, the introduction and the bio, because I guess I can shorten a little bit of, what I'm doing. But more specifically is that when you mentioned that we're a fund house, we focus specifically in deep technology. So we had a most recent fund launch just last month. In a Series B fund at $120 million US in size, focused on biosciences. So we see that a lot of the opportunities that are coming from Canada, specifically in deep tech, realize is that they need strategic investors to help them scale globally to realize their full potential in that manner. And Hong Kong is one of those places that really enable that. Just to give you an indicator is that our prior fund that was launched in 2017, we performed in 97th percentile globally in terms of that vintage year. And that's due to 70% of our startups from Canada, in which we actually led and also sat on the boards as well too. We also partner with quite a lot of incubators from Canada, including Creative Destruction Labs, Velocity, DMZ, and also over here in Hong Kong with Science Park, and also with a larger multinational companies such as Fosun Group as well too. We see around 10,000 deals per year, of which we focus on around a handful that will be filtering through actively, that will be not just only investing, but doing quite a lot of post-investment scaling as well too. So within the context of the fund is that we see that biosciences in the next 10 years will be something that will be very exciting. It's a growing addressable market with around $500 billion globally, according to McKinsey, by 2030. And it's growing at a rate of 50% CAGR per year. So what we see is that within this field, while the macro on the macro indicators, there's a lot of tailwinds. We know that there's actually a lot of work that's involved in terms of the regulatory space, in terms of operating the pilots, make sure that not just only on networks, but to follow through the investment, the tandem work that actually is required between operations and investment as well too. So as such, I kind of want to give you an example. One of the ones that we had invested in, not just in our recent fund, but in a prior fund that we had a lot of work with, was a company coming out from Toronto and Waterloo, focused in the medical technology field. And we helped them pivot from the property technology field into a much wider market. And now, this company's name is called Xander Guardian. It has offices both in Toronto and in Seoul. And long story short is that they had multiple pilots at Series A with property companies and also existing consulting groups and banks such as Goldman Sachs and PwC as well too. It is an ultra wideband human positioning system that can not just only tell through both glass, high density materials, where people are in a whole building, but it can actually understand the respiratory rate and the heart rate of people individually as well, while not using any type of visual computing. So it uses ultra wideband radar. So also following through with the privacy concerns, if you were to launch this product globally as well too. So it addresses quite a lot of pain points. But the biggest thing is that the biggest market that we identified was actually deploying into hospital networks. And so this is a medical device company. Naturally, number one is that they need to manufacture hardware products. Most hardware at scale is located in China. And so this is including high technology products, such as radar products coming out from Shenzhen and Guangdong region. So they utilize our network to actually scale them in terms of manufacturing. They also have to go through regulatory requirements. So at that point is that we don't only operate in terms of US FDA and Health Canada, but also Chinese NMPA as well too. We help them, number one, strategically focus on the resource deployment for the capital, and also to have to position them from a prop tech company to also a med tech company as well too. We've grown them 6x since our investment in 2019, and we came in at 3 rounds. So that's something that we found that it was actually a pretty interesting opportunity that I would like to share. And I think that there's a lot of companies coming out from Canada that can also do that as well too. Really quickly is that, you mentioned that the other hat I wear is not just on the venture capital side, but also in APEC. Canada is actually hosting the second APEC session in April this year. And this year's APEC specific motto is about the biocircular green economy. So it touches on logistics, supply chain, and clean technology as well. All of this, of course, the keyword is enabling through technology in that manner. We see that there's a lot of Canadian companies, not just coming out from the deep tech biosciences side, but ag tech and material sciences as well, that can help be the key enablers to actually open up the 22 economies that are in APEC to drive their change in the next 10 years for this biocircular green economy. So sitting on the sustainability co-chair committee is that I actually see that there's a lot of government funding and financing, and there's a lot of public to private opportunities, ranging from early stage through incubation to growth stage through private equity to public market and public infrastructure as well too. So that's something that I'm pretty excited about. I see that Canadian companies have a huge advantage compared to a lot of companies outside. And we see that coming in from Hong Kong, from Greater China, is that there's a lot of pent up demand as well too. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. It's really incredible to hear all of the success story that you talked about, and to hear like a cross-border transactions and grow like a small Waterloo company grow, like you mentioned, sixfold. It's really, really incredible. Ray, I'll launch the same question to you. If you could also talk a little bit about what Launch Venture does, no pun intended, and also if you have any examples of companies that you've assisted.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. As you kind of eloquently put in the intro, Launch Ventures is a culmination of a number of different types of businesses. One of the other areas that we do is we do large scale events. We have our International Traction Conference, but we do private CEO dinners and networking events to really connect entrepreneurs. We've done a few activities in the Hong Kong market. 2019 was actually a big year. There's a lot of things that we started to put in place for the next 2 to 3 years, but we all know what's been happening the last few years, and we haven't been able to execute like we wanted to. I'm a visiting professor at the Shenzhen Tech University. We were putting in a lot of systems in place to help distribute entrepreneurial education and resources into the Hong Kong market based off of what we've done here in North America. But a lot of that has been put on hold because of restrictions on travel and everything else that we've experienced the last few while. But one of the other opportunities that we're looking at bringing into Hong Kong was connecting our investor group through Victory Square, which is one of my funds, and through some of my other network, entrepreneurs in the Hong Kong, China market, to give them opportunity to take their companies public in North America through either the Canadian Stock Exchange, the TSX Venture Exchange, which I sit on the advisory board of, or through the NASDAQ. Outside the investment realm, where we really have been having an impact in the last 3 or 4 years is with our Canadian Startup Visa program. So Launch Academy, which is a nonprofit tech accelerator. We don't take equity in the companies that we work for. What we really try to do there is help international companies understand how to take their business global. And coming into Canada, we want you to think of it as a North American market, because let's face it, Canada is a great market, but it's the neighbor next door that everybody wants to tap into, and that's the US market. And we have that golden key into that market. And so what we do through Launch Academy is we create a program called our Maple program, where we help international companies expand into North America through Canada. We help them get acclimated, tap into our network, get connected to other investors, but more importantly, strategic partners and talent pools. A byproduct of the Maple program is we are able to connect you to the Global Talent Stream program, which allows you to bring international talent into a Canadian company in expedited format. Or for the founders, if they're looking to really have a hands-on approach to building their company in North America, the Canadian Startup Visa allows those founders to get permanent residency in Canada in an expedited format. And that's been proven to be really successful. We're at about 100 companies now, 100 companies from 27 different countries. In the intro, you said companies have raised over 1.2 billion. We're actually now almost close to 2 billion because 2021 was a very successful year for a lot of our companies. And a large number of them have come from the Asia market. I can give you a couple examples. Bloom-based cybersecurity company, extremely successful, based in California, based in Hong Kong, and giving them an opportunity to expand into Canada has allowed them to position some key personnel here in Canada that allows them to address their US market. Even though they have a physical presence in the US, some of the key stakeholders, key decision makers, it becomes a family decision of where does a family actually want to relocate. And let's face it, Canada right now, the brand is very strong. It is a very livable country, very stable country with everything that's happening climate-wise around the world. Canada's got clean water, clean air, and good education system, a lot of financial stability. So from a personal perspective, a lot of those founders decided that actually, if we're going to move our families, we prefer to move them to Canada and address the North American market from that headquarters. Another one that's a really interesting company that we've been helped to grow is Hollymood. Hollymood is a Airbnb platform for yachts and other luxury rentals. And even though Canada might not seem the destination for yacht rentals, them positioning themselves in Canada has been very strategic because it allows them to tap into different stakeholders. So not customer bases, even though there is customers in California and on the East Coast in New York and whatnot. For them, it's really about connecting with engineers, connecting with different investors, different university groups where they can tap into AI teams that can help them build out some of the AI layers in their platform. So the positioning it to North America, positioning it to Canada isn't about how do I grow our customer base, it's how do we find other resources that our company needs to grow. And that's been proven to be very successful for them. So that's just two examples of the hundreds that we have going through that Canadian Startup Visa program.
Thanks a lot, Ray. It's actually super interesting because often, on these panels and on on these webinars, we talk about the business and the numbers that go between country to country, but it is very interesting for you to bring out the personal side of things and everything that Canada has to offer and the brand recognition that you refer to. It's very, very interesting.
And one other layer I'll just add to that. So as much as we're talking about that company, those founders, a byproduct that we've been really surprised about is the spouses. So the spouses coming in and either becoming doctors, taking their degree or their doctorate and coming into Canada and getting into the health system here. We've had other entrepreneurs where the spouses started their own small businesses. One started a bakery. So the spouses coming in and having an economic impact and finding a new opportunity for their careers has been a welcome surprise that we didn't see coming, but it's a logical next step is, okay, you've helped the founders, the spouses, then children are ultimately going to see opportunities out here as well.
Yeah, and that's completely true because what I've seen in the experience is you talk about spouses, but I also see children, right? We have, like you mentioned before, a very incredible education program. They often will, do their education here and then afterwards stay here with the network that they've developed and then start I've seen you talk about byproduct, startups that go and then that continue on building on that, using their connections with Asia and then coming back, bridging that gap between Asia and Canada. I want to let Drew also take this opportunity to answer because I do know since we sit on the HKCBA and especially the Montreal board that you have a lot of accomplishments and if you could talk a little bit about what IJW and Code does and also how obviously you've won many awards of the Federation and HKCBA, so I'm sure that you have a lot of success stories to share as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to, Cindy. And by the way, thanks again for your invitation to appear on this panel, as well as thanks to the CanCham Hong Kong. So IJW is, as you mentioned in my intro, I'm a managing director at the firm, leading up the valuation practice. However, IJW is it's a boutique investment bank. We are headquartered in Montreal, and the other focus of IJW is transaction advisory. So we work quite a bit with mergers, acquisitions all around the world, and I've been I've been working in Hong Kong, targeting that market for the past decade. It's been 10 years already, and what a wonderful 10 years it's been. And typically, what we do, our strategy at IJW with respect to Hong Kong and Southeast Asia, it's truly to offer a cross-border perspective to firms, again, both directions. We work in transactions and investments, both directions, but typically looking at the small, medium markets. And, I think as we all know, if you are an early stage company or even like a mid-stage company, if you're looking for investment and more specifically to buy or sell a company, you're going to look regionally. You don't really think like, hey, I'm going to look, at another continent, simply because, a lot of people they'd love to, but they don't know where to start. Who do you trust? How do you go about it? That sort of thing. So we've been bridging the gap between Hong Kong and Canada. Again, both directions really important. It's in terms of if you're one of these smaller, medium-sized companies, we'll do our best to help you out, to connect the networks that the members of our firm have in both geographic regions. And again, what the other thing that makes us special is that typically M&A firms, they're great at negotiating, perhaps due diligence, that sort of thing. They're not really that strong in valuation. So my team, we work very closely with transactions to price companies, and we feel that we can help clients identify. It could be strategic purchasers, or if you're on the buy side, identify some great underpriced targets, some wonderful fits, and there's no shortage of those. Once you actually scratch the surface, I mean, the typical client would be, say, a Hong Kong company. They've done quite well. They've established themselves, but they've really hit the wall in terms of the addressable market, and so they're thinking, wow, we'd love access to to North America with all those potential clients or customers, as the case may be. So we work with them to many times partner with an existing firm here in North America to really deploy their products, services, technology, that sort of thing. And perfect example, because I know we're each giving an example, and this one I'm currently working on. I can't say the name without NDAs and all those good things, but it's a Hong Kong company, real cutting edge technology in the personal identity authentication sphere, with in terms of using AI to encrypt and decrypt communications. And again, because the technology was first developed in Hong Kong, the founders, I mean, they tried what they could, but they contacted me because they're like, well, the logical buyer here is a North American company, and they can deploy that technology on a huge scale, and hence pay the highest price for that. So that's in a nutshell, that's typically what we do.
That's really exciting. I hope that one day in the near future we'll be able to hear that success story by name without signing the NDAs.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to ask a very hard question, because I know that it's a question that probably there's many answers to. But if each of you could only give one key step or factor to consider or focus on before growing your company and succeeding, whether it's inbound in the Canadian market or outbound to the Hong Kong markets and vice versa, what would it be? I'll start with Drew.
Sure. Actually, something jumps to mind, and again, personal experience. That's just the difference in cultures. Because we are talking two different continents, two very different cultures. My advice would be, you have to be very open and attuned to the other culture. You have to be a good listener. You have to be patient. Your way, if you're dealing in, and again, this is true in both directions. Your way of doing business may not be at all welcomed, appreciated, or even needed in the other culture. And sometimes it takes quite a few years to really start to appreciate, hey, this is this is the best way people to do business. This is the best way to really to make friends and then gain clientele.
I completely agree. I think, sometimes I say that one of our strengths at CS is obviously there's the legal documents that are translating, but I was like, Google Translate now is probably there and able to do the job. But what we really do is the translation of the mindset and the business rationale behind it, which is a really important thing, Drew, like you mentioned. I'll let Ray, if you have anything to add or another piece of advice. I'm sure there's many.
Yeah, so like working with, again, 100 companies from 27 different countries. This is not something just unique to entrepreneurs from Hong Kong. This is things that entrepreneurs face when you start looking at global markets and expanding your business. And one of the things that I try to really work with the entrepreneurs that we have in our system is that you really need to have a really solid grasp on what are your corporate strengths and where are your weaknesses. A lot of people overlook how great the operations are, how easy it is for them to access specific things in their home markets. And they falsely jump to conclusions that it'll be easier in another market. And oftentimes it isn't. So really understand where your strengths lie at home, but then look at, okay, what resources or what tools are available in those other markets that I'm expanding into, and how can I get the best out of the both worlds? And again, when we talk about Canada's startup visa, a lot of people just naturally assume, oh, I'm abandoning my home market and I'm jumping to a new market. It's like, no. What you want to do is you want to look at global expansion. How do you leverage all the best of the things that you have at home? And then look at how do I get resources that shore up my weaknesses that I have at home or create new opportunities for my business in this new market. And so really understand your strengths, but also your weaknesses, and address it from shoring up the weaknesses in these new markets.
Wow, Ray, that's a really, really great piece of advice that you're giving. And I think it's going to give me an idea for my next question for you. Last but not least, Joseph, do you have anything to add about one key factor to consider or to look into?
Yeah, it's a very broad thing, but validate your expectations. We work with a number of companies, not just from Canada, but we see that, their concept of what, Asia is. Number one, Asia is not monolithic. China is not monolithic. Everything is very different from each region to region. And the thing is that, we deal with a lot of spectrum of expectations, all the way from, say, I'm going to get arrested if I actually am a Canadian and going into Canada, to the other end is like, well, China's one of the biggest markets and we're just going to make so much money. All I have to do is just, open up our product there. It's somewhere in between. And it's very contextual. A lot of times is that I find that there's a lot of missed opportunities when they think that, again, going back to Ray's suggestions and kind of experiences that a lot of Canadian companies kind of look at it or from the angles that domestically they may be dominant, or they may look at it from a regional stance, is that they are very, very good in their field, but is it really global best practices? How do they understand their competitive edge? How do they position themselves in lieu of the local competitors in that way? It takes time. You need to validate it, not just only from your primary research, but also external resources from including networks and potential investors that are properly aligned. On the other hand, there are ones that really are just too gung-ho. They would spend, most of their resources raising capital, saying that they're going to go to China, but yet they only been to China probably a handful of times, 2 weeks. They went through these little, tours or delegations, and they say, China's a big, big, big country, and we're going to make so much money. And then they're going to move their CO and CFO over there. They come back 2 years later, basically having burned their runway, and then they have to reevaluate. And that's something that's really, really important, is that when you scale, when you go global, is that you have to validate these expectations, both positive and negative.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point. And like I mentioned, all three of you have mentioned really great things, with segues to my next question is, we, in this discussion, naturally, it's all come up, like cross-border transactions are not always easy. There's a lot of success stories, but, with the differences in languages, like just talking about Hong Kong versus China versus the rest of Asia, different languages, different cultures, different legal systems. I know I'm always shocking people when I say you have to register your trademark in Hong Kong and in China. And then if you want to go elsewhere in Asia, it's another fee. And they're like, oh, but it's all Asia. No. And, there's different business traditions, time zones. I know I talked about good morning to good evening. It's a very broad time zone. So maybe perhaps you could share with the audience, a challenge that companies face when doing these cross-border transactions. And if you have hopefully a solution around it, or some maybe ideas of solutions. I'll start by Ray.
Yeah, just thinking back to like the companies that we've worked with. And again, this is not just a Hong Kong scenario of coming to Canada. A lot of companies, when they do come and expand into this market, I think they try to cut corners on legal fees, accounting fees. And when you're an ideation company, early stage companies, that might be okay, because like there's not much at stake here and it's easy for you to make these transition adjustments. But when you do have IP, you've got talent and you've got other things happening in certain markets, you want to make sure your corporate structure is set up properly for the Canadian market. And it's not just to protect those things, it's also so that you can take advantage of all the great things available to you in the Canadian market as a Canadian company. And so if you are able to structure it properly, you can take advantage of the tax credit programs that we have here. There's one here called SHRED, Scientific Research and Experimental Development. It's one of the best in the world. If you were to spend, say, $1 million in R&D, engineering fees, salaries in the US, you would get 15% of that back, if you're lucky, in tax credits for the R&D spend. In Canada, that's 65%. So for every $1 million that you're spending in R&D here in Canada with Canadian labor or through contractors, you're going to potentially get $650,000 back tax-free into your company that then you can just reinvest into more R&D. And that's a massive program. But then there's other things that a lot of people overlook, where as a Canadian company, you can work in conjunction with Canadian universities where you can have professors coming in and helping you solve challenges and problems in your company with a team of PhD students. And this is all practically done for free with these teams. And they really become instrumental in a lot of innovative R&D for a lot of Canadian companies. But the thing is, you need to make sure your company is structured properly to be able to take advantage of that. And so try not to cut corners and make sure you're looking at it holistically as, okay, again, go back to my first point of understanding where the strengths are, but also understanding your weaknesses. How can you leverage these opportunities in the North American market, and in particular, Canada through the Canadian system that's available to Canadian companies? Because as a Hong Kong company, it's easier for you to incorporate a subsidiary or a sister company in Canada than it is in a lot of other countries. So why not take advantage of that?
Yeah, definitely, Wayne. I could tell you from experience, I could concur with from experience that the fees to set up properly outweigh the fees to fix it or to try to do things afterwards. And there's also tax analysis that goes into that as well, as you mentioned, accounting, legal, all of those things. Joseph, I don't know if you have anything to add that you would like to talk about, maybe a different challenge or concurring challenge that companies face.
Oh yeah, for sure. A lot of challenges, but the one that kind of comes to the top of my head, again, in the context of cross-border and, from Canada into Greater China, is the aspect of understanding negotiation leverage. We see that a lot of these Canadian companies, sometimes they're very, very competitive in terms of their product, their offering, their know-how, their structure and everything. And they sometimes get I would say they get enticed by investors coming in either from the corporate side or large-scale companies that are offering large sums of capital for pilots, etc. Now, again, you have to look at it from the angle of alignment. And a lot of these companies, while they may be, the top, 5 within their field, not just in Greater China, but in the Asia-Pacific region, sometimes they look at smaller scale companies coming out from different places in the world as opportunities to invest in. Sometimes it could be just really direct, is that they just want to hedge their bets. But oftentimes is that they'll look at it and say that, well, this company is quite small, it doesn't hurt to seed it. But then it not just only does it open up issues of IP and all of that, potential for copying, infringement, etc. But the structure itself is that if they invest and there's contingencies and they build up scale, that is only, they put all their eggs into one basket with one pilot with, basically say the largest manufacturer for agricultural, I'm just going to make this up, biosecurity companies for scanning and identification. And you ramped it up, but they don't pay you. They simply just, there's an issue of not paying their pilot according to a time schedule based on whatever reasons within the small details of the contracts. They're in cash flow issue. They experience cash flow issues, and then that's where the real negotiations come in. So we see that a lot of times is that it's not just only a legal aspect, but also understanding in terms of not just reputation, but setting up the operations, segregation of duties, and also de-risking it with investment partners that actually have worked closely with companies such as the ones coming out from Canada. that actually have scaled them and worked with them in terms of long-term opportunities and align the carry, align, the equity, accordingly, so that, it wouldn't be an adversarial type of conversation, because it becomes a huge drain on resources and time for companies that are operating overseas in that way. So there has been a couple cases we had to kind of come in with deals that are originally, Canadian deals that we've encountered. They're halfway there, and we had to help them restructure that. So that's something that we see, from us as an investor, it's an opportunity, but for startups themselves, you don't want to be caught in that situation.
That's great advice, and a very particular example of a challenge that could be faced. Drew, do you have any other examples of challenges that companies may face in the cross-border transactions? And hopefully solutions?
I do, Cindy. And again, a lot of personal experience here. I think there's a market difference, going back to the culture aspect between, generally speaking, Western, Canadian, US professionals, whether it be developing a network or even just moving forward on a deal. They're much more, they're just direct to the point. Let's get it done. If you meet someone, networking event, they're going to say, okay, yeah, come to my office tomorrow, or, in 2 days, and we'll sit down and we'll get started and we'll move forward. We'll, or, here's the deal. Let's get going on the due diligence. In Asia, I find it's very different. You have to be a lot more patient. They want, Asian people, again, generalization, but, I've experienced this quite a bit. They want to get to know you. You're going to have to, it's like peeling an onion. You have to establish trust. They want to see you several times. And sometimes it might take several months or a year until they trust you sufficiently to say, okay, yes, we'll start doing business with you now. That sort of thing. Obviously, they're on a deal. They're not going to wait. People aren't going to wait a year, but even that, they really want to, kick the tires and just gain confidence in you. And if you're not patient, you lose out. And what I love about the Asian way is that, yes, you have to work harder, but they're a lot. I find relationships, they're a lot stickier. Once you gain the confidence, you have it for much longer. In fact, a lot of people, they in Asia, they like to, like, as a professional service provider, they like to tell their friends, oh, go to this professional, my professional, like she or he, they're great. You're gonna love them. They've done great things for me. Whereas in Canada, the US, hey, you're just as good as your last job. Somebody undercuts you, you're out. So that's one big difference I've seen.
Thanks a lot, Drew. And obviously, we're hearing of some of the challenges with cross-border transactions, but, I have to go back to when we started our webinar of all the success stories that you've shared at the beginning, some on a no-name basis, but it sounds like it's all well worth it. So maybe if you can let the audience know, and I'm sure there's many, Ray already alluded to some of that in the Canadian market, the SHRED program. What's the competitive advantage for Hong Kong or Asian companies looking to expand to Canada, and vice versa for Canadian companies looking to expand into Hong Kong? And if you can just go, I really loved Ray's example, because I'm just hearing like lots of opportunities there with those advantages. So I'll start with Joseph.
Yeah, sure. Again, my context mostly are Canadian companies coming out and utilizing Hong Kong as a launch platform. So Canadian companies, why? Well, I mean, our most recent fund, why biosciences? Because we see that, there's I would say a drive towards deep tech in terms of growing demand coming out from Greater China. If you look at the 5-year plans, both from the central government and individual provinces, is that they understand is that they have a large volume and of market to adopt and to adapt to technology improvements and technology deployments in that way. And China has been one of the largest spenders, top 2 globally in the last 5 years. But they want to ensure is that, one of the things is to have their own engine for intellectual property development and basic research. And that's something that Canada has been very well known for. Especially we see that, Canadian companies in early stages talking about, pre-seed all the way to Series A, is that there has been so much growth over the last 15 years in deep technology with foundations of, I would say CEOs, founders, and all that. They have understood the best practices, having worked in the US, in Silicon Valley, developing or leading companies such as that, and also working in, fields of basic research in their own specific domains. We talk about, University of Alberta, with reinforcement learning and AI. We talk about Waterloo in terms of their engineering applications, UBC with biotech. Those are areas that are, Canada is not just great in North America, but globally. And there's actually has been a lot of funding and financing at the early stages from non-dilutive grants, be it from the federal side, we talked about SHRED and IRAP and all that, and also from the provincial side as well too. And the problem is that, these Canadian companies kind of get stagnant around Series B or so like that, where they actually need scale. And that's where they kind of look towards US traditionally. But because of, the opportunities coming from these days, in the tech field, the demand is becoming much more prevalent all around the world, not just US. US is still one of the key drivers and engines, but the ones that are not just coming online, but the ones that are, vying for dominance in terms of capital deployment, in terms of, strategic opportunities from public to private relationships, include not just China, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Thailand, Japan, Korea, and that's just to name a few, just in the Asia Pacific region. And so Canadian, companies, number one, is that they are there. They're the ones that have this unique aspect of technical capability in terms of a global, in a global sense, that, the best in class. Number two, the founders themselves oftentimes have multiple years of experience working not just in Canada, but US as well too. And, like it or not, is that US is, sets lots of examples in terms of global scaling, in terms of business operations, governance, management, and all that, that investors would have put a lot of trust in. So these Canadian companies, they themselves, ultimately when you talk to investors at early stage, you look at a team. The team, are capable. But then there still needs to be a lot of work done. But then that's where Canadian startups shine. And I think we can call it, I would call it arbitrage value, but it's more of an alpha to identify these companies and help them scale within that context. There has been a lot more capital coming in, from the US and from China, setting up investment companies directly in Canada because of that. But the fact is that this is more for non-deep tech companies. So we find that deep tech companies still have that difference. And if you are operating in that field, that's where you can actually capture that alpha in that way as an investor.
Thanks, Joseph. I'm going to hand it over to Ray, who's already talked about some of this competitive advantages in his last question, answer to the last question.
Well, Joseph kind of stole a bit of my thunder. I want to talk about the access to the US market, which like by and far, it is a huge, huge Canadian advantage. And so it's just, the truth is, like, it's been challenging to look at the US market under Trump, and then now with the war and recession, everything else happening in the US, there's some serious challenges there. But coming into Canada gives you the opportunity to get the best of both worlds. You get a little bit more of a family-friendly environment. You've got a little bit more stability here in Canada, but the true market that you're trying to leverage for your business is right next door, and that's the US. But the topic that I probably would really want to hone in on is the biggest challenge to any tech company, and I'll now start to argue any type of company, is talent. We have a global shortage of talent, and that's never going to get resolved because there is always a new influx of new technologies that people are needing to get educated on and trained on. And so there's always going to be this differential of a shortage of talent. And again, when I go back to being really strategic of where you position yourselves, understand your strengths and weaknesses, one of the great strengths that Canada has is we do have a good, strong educational system. We do have good, strong talent pools. But where it really gets to become interesting is the Canadian approach to immigration systems that allow you to import talent in. Again, if you're in Asia and you're going to stay in Asia, you probably have access to cheap talent and other strong pools of talent. But if you're positioning a headquarters in North America, there probably is no better place than Vancouver, especially for Hong Kong, because we've got great ties with Hong Kong. Like I've got so many of my friends that their parents immigrated from Hong Kong in the 70s and 80s. And so there is a good synergy there. But from an international perspective, like in 2019, we had over 100 Bay Area companies, Silicon Valley Bay Area companies, set up offices in Vancouver. And the primary reason is it's the same time zone as San Francisco. It is a strong talent pool locally that they can tap into. A lot of university programs. There are applied sciences, applied AI here in Vancouver is very strong. Theoretical AI is really strong in Toronto and Waterloo. But most importantly, it was the immigration programs. Vancouver and Canada gave these companies an opportunity to source out international talent and bring it in. Now, in the last 2 years, we've seen this explosion of remote work and work from home. I would still argue that in a year's time, where you domicile yourself is going to be very important for work. And Canada's brand has never been stronger, and it will continue to be that draw that you can leverage when you're trying to recruit international talent. If you can give somebody a 2-year work visa in Canada in under 4 weeks, why would you not want to explore that? And that's the global talent stream. And if you're looking at entrepreneurs and founders, you're able to get permanent residency within 12 to 16 months. For up to 5 founders. And so that's very powerful as well. And then there's the intercompany transfer program that's been put in place that's really expediting the ability to transfer talent from Hong Kong to Vancouver, from Romania to Vancouver, Toronto, as long as you have corporations set up properly in each one of those jurisdictions. So very, very favorable approach to immigration and continue to grow that way.
Thanks, Ray. I know that this is a super interesting conversation that I could probably have on for another like hour or so. And I think, we've discussed that this, we could talk about this for hours on end, all of us together, especially because we're such a seasoned panel. However, I am mindful of time. So I will thank you all for your insights. And I want to leave a little bit of time to open the floor for questions from our attendees. Once again, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be able to moderate questions in English, French, or even Chinese. And as I mentioned earlier, I know that we're running out of time. So if we're missing any questions that we cannot answer today, we will endeavor to have them answered via after the event from our panelists. So I have a question that came in, and it goes really well with Ray, what you just started off. Maybe I'll make this a quick fire 1-minute answers. What sets the Canadian startup visa apart from the other programs?
So I'm going to kind of regurgitate what I've heard from entrepreneurs themselves. They tell me that the Canadian startup visa is probably one of the best startup visas in the world. They've looked at the UK, Ireland has one. The US has been trying to get theirs off the ground. The Canadian one is up to 5 founders, plus spouses, plus children, all get the work permits within and student permits within like 4 to 6 weeks. COVID's delayed that, but those numbers were somewhat accurate when we were in normal times. And then you get your permanent residency within 12 months. But the really beauty of it, there's no age limits. And the success of the startup is not tied to the success of the PR. So once you get your PR is there for life. It's continued. Sorry, not for life, but for 5 years. But if your startup gets acquired, it doesn't affect your PR. If your startup shuts down, it doesn't affect your PR. If, say, you've got 3 founders and one of them decides to go work for Saltagen and one of your portfolio companies, Joseph, that PR will continue. There is no impact on that. And so that's a big differentiator with a lot of the other international ones. No age limit is another big one. We've got a lot of entrepreneurs that are in their 40s. They've got families, they're looking at life a lot differently, and they want to explore new opportunities and new markets. And so the Canadian Startup Visa has been very, very popular for that crowd in particular.
That's fantastic. I'm going to do quick fire, another question, 1 minute answer maximum. Another question that I saw raised, and I think we've alluded a little bit, Joseph talking about bioscience green tech, but I'll ask Drew, are there any industries that you perceive as being particularly attractive with respect to cross-border investment activity?
Well, I think definitely tech. I mean, that's to me, that's quite obvious. And again, a lot like why we could go into it for quite a bit, but I'll reiterate what Ray's saying. I mean, it's just the Canadian government and coupled with some of the provincial governments, the assistance through tax credits. It's extraordinary. So we've dealt with a number of Hong Kong companies during our experience in Hong Kong that want to expand to North America, in Canada in particular. In fact, Quebec is quite good. I'll wave my Quebec flag here. And if you locate a presence in Quebec with Quebec workers, it doesn't take a whole lot. You can really pay for a huge amount of R&D that then can be used throughout the world.
Thanks a lot, Drew. I'll wrap this up with the last minor comments from Joseph, because I saw that there was a question come in terms of the hottest business opportunities in the market right now, which ties in well with the question I was just asked before. So maybe quick fire, what is the hottest one?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why we're in biosciences is because over the last 5 years, institutional fund-of-fund investors from pension funds all the way to academic endowments have increased allocation more than 17 times globally, specifically in the fields of precision medicine, agricultural technology, and nanotechnology. We see that that's a deep science investment opportunity. A lot of them have not found good fund managers that have been able to identify and scale these globally. But this is something that, not just because COVID has been a catalyst, for people to understand and to invest into, more deeper technologies such as mRNA, encapsulations, in terms of different types of genetic modification opportunities. We see that, also this year, specifically in 2022, there's been an issue about, increasing interest rates. And I see that, to a lot of, in this field is that non-specialized investors, especially in early stage, are actually, experiencing some issues in terms of deployment. And we see that, the ones that are specialized have worked in this for multiple, decades or plus, understand this field, inside and out. And this is the best time to be able to capture this market right now. But it requires not just experience in terms of operational and regulatory understanding, but a lot of cross-border understanding in terms of de-risking methodologies. It's not just only about growing that in the US FDA market or in the EU market individually. Is that it's a global market right now. And that's where we see that this is the hottest part in terms of growth, not just from an institutional LP side, but high net worth individuals have been learning a lot and experiencing a lot of returns, especially now that public markets and and bonds and are not exactly the best places to actually invest in right now. Is that they're looking at private capital in terms of opportunities and in finding specialists investing in deep technologies that they do not understand, but that can actually capture this type of opportunity in this perfect vintage year.
Thanks a lot, Joseph, for the hottest markets for the final question. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I will have to stop the Q&A panel discussion here. Thank you, everyone, for raising your question. Like I mentioned before, any questions unanswered will be answered. We'll try our best to answer them after this event. I would first like to thank our dear panelists for your fantastic discussion, Joseph, Ray, Drew, and as well as Emily for her opening remarks. I'd like to also thank our sponsors for this event, without whom we would not be possible. And thank you, last but definitely not least, also to our dear participants for joining today's session. We really appreciate your time here with us today. If you'd like to connect with myself or any of our speakers today, please feel free to do so via LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn profiles will be shared in the chat, and you should have also received a list of attendees before the conference, so please feel free to connect with them as well. We hope you enjoyed today's panel and that you'll join us for the remainder of the 8th Transpacific Conference co-organized by CanCham and HKCBA, and we look forward to seeing you at the networking session later on. Thank you so much once again, and have a great day or evening.